Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, confirming what it has repeatedly attacked you, Max, for reporting.
Yeah. So anyone who's been watching this stream for the last 8 or 9 months knows that we at the Grayzone and me were one of the first to report in English, to put the pieces together about October 7th. Not the first, maybe, not the only, of course. You know, Electronic Intifada has done important work on this, to put the pieces together and show that many Israeli citizens were killed by their own government under the notorious Hannibal Directive order, which became a mass Hannibal order on October 7th. That firing regulations were abandoned. The Israeli military used disproportionate force using Apache helicopters, drones, to attack cars going back to Gaza, as well as tank shells into homes filled with Israelis who were held captive by Palestinian militants in order to deny Hamas political leverage, which it would have used, and which it does use and is using right now, to extract concessions from Israel it would have never gotten under occupation and siege, like the release of Palestinian prisoners who are effectively captives being tortured in Israeli prisons. So I reported on, I think it was October 27th. October 7th testimonies reveal Israel's military shelling Israeli citizens with tanks, missiles. This was, a synthesis of reporting that was already public and an analysis of it, most of it in Hebrew media, including that, it's all buried in Hebrew media, that the general who was in charge of the Gaza division, which had been virtually wiped out on October 7th, Avi Rosenfeld, ordered a drone to attack the Erez crossing, which is the biggest military base, the nexus of the siege of Gaza, killing untold numbers of Israeli military personnel when that base was overrun. And, this was corroborated in the recent Haaretz report. But this is how I was treated for reporting that, because that article went viral. It got translated into Hebrew. It made its way into influential Hebrew and Israeli listservs and chat groups. Masterclass in manipulation, exposing Max Blumenthal's lies about Israel on October 7th. The Grayzone editor has a history of denying war crimes, so it's no surprise he provided a piece that very selectively uses facts, includes purposely edited quotes to change their meaning. How do they know that I purposely edited anything? And grossly plays down the atrocities against Israelis. This was written by someone named Michal Perach, someone who's never written an article before anywhere else. Very unusual. It was like, I looked up her background and found she had done some trips in Peru, but I couldn't find anything else on this person, supposedly an academic. And then what followed from there were the Washington Post attacks on us, which culminated, I hope it's the culmination, with a call for the imprisonment of our editor, Wyatt Reed. All because I supposedly invented this whole mass Hannibal. And now it's all kind of corroborated. IDF ordered Hannibal Directive, not confirmed. I don't need anybody to confirm me. It doesn't confirm me just because you come from some mainstream or Israeli publication. It's a corroboration, it's a validation, it's a vindication, but it's not a confirmation. IDF ordered Hannibal Directive on October 7th to prevent Hamas taking soldiers captive. Quote, there was crazy hysteria and decisions started being made without verified information. Documents and testimonies obtained by Haaretz reveal the Hannibal Directive operational order, which directs the use of force to prevent soldiers being taken into captivity. It was employed at 3 army facilities infiltrated by Hamas, potentially endangering civilians as well. And that's kind of an understatement. Aaron, you wrote a piece about how widespread the Hannibal Directive was on October 7th. Take us through this Haaretz article.
Well, I just tried to count based on the reporting you've done and then what appears in Haaretz, just how many different locations where Hannibal was enacted on October 7th. And I counted 8. kibbutzim, a number of military bases, a military outpost, in the vehicles that were headed towards Gaza, and then the entire southern area, the boundary area between Gaza and Israel, which according to Haaretz the order was to turn it into a killing zone. And other revelations from Haaretz, or I mean, you can tell me if it's a revelation, that the Israeli army ordered Hannibal to be used, starting very early in the morning at around 7 a.m. and then kept ordering it again and again and again at military bases. And what you pointed out to me was also that you hadn't seen before that artillery was used by the Israeli military in enacting the Hannibal Directive. You had talked before about the Apache helicopters raining down Hellfire missiles, but as far as, if I get you correctly, it was news to you that artillery from tanks was also deployed. I mean, we knew about the tanks at one of the kibbutzes. You've written about that before, but apparently in Haaretz, there was some new information about the artillery being used on the ground.
Yeah, that as sort of a kill zone was created in the frontier between the southern Gaza envelope in Israel and Gaza itself to prevent vehicles from going back with the war booty that Hamas had extracted. This was the perspective of the Israeli military at the time. Late in the afternoon, starting at 2 p.m. and going for hours afterwards. So artillery was launched at vehicles and anything passing between Gaza and Israel. And you look at the vehicles, there it is. The instructions, says the source in Southern Command. It's the Southern Command of the Israeli military, was meant to turn the area around the border fence into a killing zone, closing it off from the west. And so you look at all those images of destroyed cars that were piled up and were said to be the vehicles of revelers at the Nova Electronic Music Festival that have been just completely roasted, destroyed. And yet, we always asked, how were Hamas militants with their Kalashnikovs and rocket-propelled grenades able to do that to so many vehicles? And now we know they didn't do it. Or if they did, it was not to all the vehicles. It was Israeli Hellfire missiles. It was artillery, tank shells. And this is the order that was given from Israeli Southern Command, quote, "Not a single vehicle can return to Gaza." Yediot Aharonot, the Israeli publication, had previously reported that over 70 vehicles were targeted by helicopters alone. So how many Israelis were actually killed by these gunships and tanks and and drones? How many? Was it just dozens, scores, hundreds? What is the actual death toll of October 7th at the hands of Hamas? First, we were told it was 1,400, then they went down to 1,200 because they counted Palestinians who had been killed. Everyone knew by then that such vehicles could be carrying kidnapped civilians or soldiers, a source in Southern Command told Haaretz. So they knew they were killing Israelis, killing lots of them. They were doing it deliberately. That was the point of the order. So I think what we have on our hands here is one of the biggest scandals of the past year, for sure. But one of the biggest scandals because of this war, because Israel clearly sought to inflate the death toll of October 7th and to exaggerate and even fabricate atrocities in order to manufacture the case for carrying out genocide in Gaza. And now we know that it's killed, that the death toll would be lower, significantly lower, if they hadn't tried to kill so many of their own civilians. And then this speaks to the kind of sloganeering that has been employed, propaganda that's been employed to portray October 7th as a second Holocaust, as Shoah 2.0. Kamala Harris had the words put in her mouth during a press briefing or a speech in which she said that October 7th was the worst atrocity committed against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Okay, well, if that's the case, now we know that Israel was a direct participant in the worst atrocity against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and they helped drive up the numbers with their own military doctrine, not with some accident, but with a doctrine. And that says everything we need to know about Zionism and its professed promise to protect Jews and keep them safe.
And the same U.S. establishment media that has kept all this from the U.S. public ever since October 7th, even now with this new reporting from Haaretz, is still hiding it. I think in a few articles and major papers, it's been buried at the bottom of paragraphs, but this should be headline news, as it was in the Grayzone and Electronic Intifada and Mondo Weiss from the start, which everybody else ignored. And again, Max, you and Ali Abunimah and David Sheen and Aso and Stenley, Jonathan Cook, you guys have been writing about this for months and documenting this, the only ones doing so in the English language, and you deserve a ton of credit for it. And it's unfortunate that other outlets, including progressive ones, aren't doing that, aren't acknowledging the work you did, because it's vital. Without you guys, we would not know about the reality of October 7th. And this propaganda campaign carried out by Israel to cover up what really happened would have been unimpeded. And it's, of course, it's unbelievable that only 9 months later will an Israeli outlet finally admit the truth. And I suspect we're going to learn even more, because there's still details that we don't know, obviously. But it's just, it's amazing that it took that long for Haaretz to come out with a story like this. And I mean, do you have any thoughts on the timing of this? Like why this would come out at the time that it did?
Yeah, I think the timing, the reason for the timing is clear. An Israeli military investigation into failures on October 7th was pending, and that appeared yesterday. And I don't know if we have time to go over that report, but it did cover the Hannibal Directive orders in Kibbutz Be'eri. I mean, the report was mainly limited to Kibbutz Be'eri, where most of the casualties occurred, or the most casualties occurred on October 7th. And it covered the shelling of the Pessi Cohen home, where 13 Israeli citizens were killed. I think 2 survived, after an Israeli tank was ordered to fire a shell into the home because they were being held captive by Palestinian militants, and the Israeli military didn't want to negotiate an end to that standoff. The militants did. They were willing to give up their arms and negotiate, but they weren't going to do that. And they killed children, elderly people, and then they blamed it all on Hamas and claimed Hamas killed them and tried to cover it up. And it was eventually acknowledged that Brigadier General Barak Hiram, who is up for promotion to replace Avi Rosenfeld as commander of the Gaza division, gave that order. And so this military investigation actually tries to clear Barak Hiram's name and blame it all on a wider order, which is interesting to me. But the reason that the report came out was, I guess, the military wanted to kind of get out ahead of the story as this report was coming out. There will be further investigations and further reports. And I mean, the Israeli coalition is in a state of crisis. The war cabinet is in a state of crisis. Gallant and Netanyahu are at loggerheads. Netanyahu wants to replace Gallant with a loyalist who emerged from the Likud party, Gideon Sa'ar, who has a new little offshoot party, because Gallant has become a problem, as has the entire military. I mean, we've seen the military leak to the New York Times attacking Netanyahu and saying they would like to negotiate some kind of cessation. But Aaron, have you seen U.S. mainstream media report at all on this titanic scandal of mass friendly fire orders on October 7th?
Yeah, nothing. Again, I think I saw one reference to the Israeli investigation at that one kibbutz mentioned. So the discussion of Israeli forces firing on Israelis, I think it was in one paragraph buried at the bottom of one article, maybe in the Washington Post or the New York Times. But aside from that, nothing. No. This, of course, should be front page news. It should be everywhere. But everyone's just so on board with manufacturing consent for mass murder that they're even obeying their oath of silence on covering the Israeli military killing its own on what they constantly say in parroting Israel and the U.S., that this is the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust.